Okay, so I'm Jim Simonelli. I'm the Senior Vice President for Secure Power Emerging Businesses. So one of the things that we see with the edge is that there's a tremendous amount of things that are going on in digitization that's driving new thinking about edge and edge environments. It used to be that perhaps there was something that that could all be solved with a cloud if you were in 2007, 2008. And now there's some things that are happening with digital transformations that's driving new types of customer experiences, new types of efficiencies. That's really kind of driving the need to put compute closer to where the data is first sort of instantiated. And it really is driving kind of two vectors. One, as I mentioned, one is around customer experiences, our own personal experiences. The second is around how do we make my processes more efficient. In the upshot of that is that we're starting to see crazy numbers of data being consumed and generated where it's first sensed or detected. So something on the order of like 20 billion IoT assets being connected in 2020, and about 40% of all internet traffic needing to flow through some edge type data center somewhere. And that's causing some heartaches when you start thinking about customer experiences and try to manage things like latency, which is a big customer experience if I have a augmented reality, or even just as a shopper trying to make sure I can get a very good immediate experience on checkout or things like that. That's really kind of driving those dimensions of the business. The second things are around bandwidth. They have all this data, and do I have to send this all back up to the cloud, which costs money and actually some efficiency before I can get it back? That's another challenge that's ongoing. And the other is privacy, data privacy. Do I really want my data to be kind of distributed around the world for computing? Those are the three main drivers that we start seeing as challenges for this edge and why everything can't be up in the cloud. And then one of the things that we see with customers is that, okay, if I do have to put compute closer to where the data is first generated, then that means that I'm living now in an environment where I have classically distributed, very distributed, and oftentimes remote, and the second is unstaffed in those locations. And those are all now causing us to rethink a bit about not just kind of where IT, compute, storage, and networking needs to be, but actually how can I secure it, how can I remotely manage it and service it, and how do I make sure that it's operating as effectively as it needs to operate in these types of environments. So we think about those dimensions of, at the end of the day, there's big challenges. I've got many sites, offer remote, no IT staff. How do I actually manage these sites, which is by far one of the top priorities for our clients and customers to understand. And we've been working for over a decade on an EcoStructure architecture that allows us to connect different types of products with control and with analytics on top of that to allow us to understand what's going on at those sites and then to provide the services enabled for them. So we've developed this EcoStructure architecture enabled through a piece of software we call EcoStructure IT. And then we have a services platform that we call EcoStructure Asset Advisor on top of that really allows the combination of management, which is services plus software, to be able to kind of both monitor and actually understand the data, understand where there potentially are going to be failures in the future so I can solve them and resolve them in a more predictive way than have to wait for them to break and fix and then send out a person that might otherwise be done in a more effective manner. To understand which applications have to work at the edge, it really comes down to, again, the customer experience that's trying to be enabled. Some are well suited to just being hosted in the cloud. A lot of AI, deep analytics on large volumes of data are much better served in a cloud environment. Then there's other data and apps that really need to be served close to the edge. And some things that come to mind are things like, particularly when you're trying to do things like automated checkout or automated experiences with customers that might be one to walk into a store. We have these Amazon Go examples, which you see from time to time. A customer walks into the store. There is hundreds of video cameras up above watching their activity. There's sensors located in every shelf, and really at that time you really kind of have to, which you're grabbing a product, they're keeping very close track of kind of what you're grabbing, when and where, and as you walk out to keep very tight track of that. That's an application that you really can't get that experience back in a centralized data center because it has to happen at a very local experience. But even things like if it's in another a healthcare environment, would be another type thing. You have nurses stations that are trying to gather more and more data for their patients, understand not just the health of the patients, but also the patient and their family's experience in that space. That's putting a lot of bandwidth for streaming video services and medical information locally, as well as gathering and analyzing data on dozens of hospital rooms at the same time. Again, that type of application has to be done in a more localized experience. Anything that really is requiring this low latency or the need to have compute done in a more local area because there is this convergence of multi-systems working together, or because it's more cost effective, or because there's a need for kind of quick response, is what those types of applications are that's driving that type of a need. When you think about edge, how do you decide, one of the questions is the confusing part of the edge, and how do I decide how do I decide, and how do I ensure that the infrastructure I put at the edge is right? How do I make sure that it can be deployed quickly, easily, and reliably? And one of the dimensions of that is understanding that no one company can actually do this alone. There's probably two key factors in doing that. One is understanding that the edge needs to be served by an ecosystem, and that's a convergence of infrastructure providers like Schneider Electric. It's also working with different types of system integrators. It's working with different OEM providers to make sure that these customers can be served in a very integrated manner, if that's how they want it, delivering something that is fully integrated from IT, fully tested and delivered on site, to perhaps something that is better served as assembled on site type services. That whole dimension is something that requires an ecosystem to work together to make that all kind of come together to a fruition. Now, when you think about that, it's not just people talking to make that work, it's how do we understand the standards and how do we understand the interfaces that they have to work together. And for that, what we see is that the world is moving towards two things that you start seeing more and more of. One is reference designs. So how do I have a customer who goes from a use case to deciding which IT I need, what infrastructure I need, how do I service and manage that over the lifetime? And one way to do that at scale is to make sure that you have a set of reference designs that are well matched to the different use cases, whether it's retail, healthcare, hospital, education, to help make those work. And the second is to have a set of design tools or configuration tools that helps a user enter a problem or it could be a partner trying to work with their end customer, trying to understand what their problem is, help them quickly, easily, and reliably come up with these systems that make sense for those end needs. So again, there's probably two things that I see that are really necessary for edge deployments. One is that to understand that no one company does it alone. There is an ecosystem that has to come together, and there's a degree of standardization and configuration tools to help make that so that what shows up on site works the first time and can be serviced and managed over its full life cycle. So I think that the economics of the edge is probably a few dimensions there. I think there's a minimum somewhere. So if you look at it as an optimization curve as to how do I actually make sure that optimization curve of trying to look at both cost and also meeting the customer needs is that it's really not kind of one size fits all. There's something that you can find that right balance between if I put everything at the edge, then you're right, because you don't get the economies of scale, you can get some of it back with standardization, but probably not all of it. That you're going to spend a fair amount of CapEx and perhaps some OpEx making that work in that dimension, just because you don't get those same economies of scale. You get perhaps standardization and scale in numbers, but not the whole centralization scale that you get in a centralized data center. You go on the other side, you get the economies of scale, but now you have distance from both experience, but also from data pipes. There's a lot of data flowing over networks that both consume energy and also cost money as well. So you start finding this kind of this weird, these weird kind of dimensions that key up. Where if I just bring everything back to the cloud, I certainly have to worry about my latency issues. I also have to worry about cost issues of that. The cost of storage, cost of data, cost of energy, that kind of all translates in how do you get it back to the cloud. At the same time, I lose some of the economies if I do it out where I've got higher CapEx, but I don't have to worry about pushing data all the way back through the network that also costs energy and costs money as well. And so it's that balance that we see, and I think that's what we're going to see more and more of those conversations on, which is around what's the optimum for my particular application? Where do I have to put it across central versus remote, balancing again that customer experience.